Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a massive, cinematic leap to the absolute edges of the Earth. We're going to explore places with landscapes so completely otherworldly and extreme isolation so intense they honestly feel like another planet. If you've ever wondered just how far humanity can stretch its boundaries and what it actually looks like when we do, well, you are in the exact right place. Let's jump in.
I want you to really imagine this for a second. Picture waking up surrounded by deadly, bone-chilling cold, or looking out at an infinite oceanic void, or standing on barren volcanic rock. Now ask yourself, what does it actually take to survive on the extreme edge? Because it's not just about enduring the environment. It's about building an entire life in places where the geography is, frankly, actively working against you.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our itinerary for today. 1. Surviving the deep freeze. 2. Life at the icy fringes. 3. The ultimate oceanic void. 4. The outpost of stones. And 5. The cost of extreme isolation.
Part 1. Surviving the deep freeze. Oymyakon, Siberia.
Trapped in this deep valley bowl that basically acts like a giant trap for freezing air, the environment here is absolutely lethal. Just look at this staggering number, -67.7 degrees Celsius. That is the official record low temperature from way back in 1933, officially cementing Oymyakon as the coldest permanently inhabited human settlement on our planet. To put that extreme cold into perspective for you, schools here, they only close when the temperature drops below -55 degrees. Crazy, right?
But what's truly fascinating about this place is the sheer juxtaposition. You'd probably think it's just a frozen wasteland all year round, but actually, the village swings from this brutal, dry winter to a surprisingly hot summer. Like we're talking daytime temps occasionally topping 30 degrees Celsius. This creates a world record temperature range of a mind-boggling 105.8 degrees Celsius between those historical extremes.
And because of those wild extremes, the entire village sits on continuous permafrost. That means the ground remains completely frozen year-round, which totally dictates how the remaining population, fewer than 900 people by the way, build their homes and literally just survive. The deeply frozen ground restricts plant life to incredibly hardy species, and since agriculture is practically impossible, locals rely really heavily on ice fishing and fur trading instead.
Part 2. Life at the icy fringes. Alert and Etokokortorit.
First up is Alert, Canada. Located on the northern edge of Ellesmere Island, it is the northernmost inhabited settlement on Earth. And, Alert isn't your typical town with streets and quiet neighborhoods. No, it's a huddled cluster of military and civilian buildings pitched right on the tundra, shrouded in these incredibly long, dark winters. The few dozen residents are constantly fending off frigid temps and, the ever-present threat of polar bears. It literally feels like an isolated space station on some icy alien world.
Meanwhile, over in Greenland, the Inuit settlement of Etokortorit represents a completely different kind of extreme isolation. It sits right at the mouth of the world's largest fjord system, but get this, it is physically trapped by sea ice for 8 months out of the year. With the nearest inhabited area over 600 kilometers away by sea, you can only get there by helicopter or during these incredibly brief windows when boats can actually navigate the thawed waters. Yet, despite being cut off from the rest of the planet, this resilient community survives off the land by hunting seals, narwhals, and muskoxen.
Part 3. The ultimate oceanic void. Tristan da Cunha.
Just try to grasp the scale of that number for a second. 3,700 kilometers. That is the vast, churning distance across open ocean from this tiny volcanic island to the nearest shores of South America. The main island is essentially a massive shield volcano rising straight up from the abyssal ocean depths, capped by a peak that is constantly covered in clouds. A tiny population of fewer than 300 people lives on literally the only flat plain available on the entire island.
But this intense isolation brilliantly illustrates how nature actually thrives in the void. Because it's so unbelievably remote, human disturbance is kept to an absolute minimum. The islanders make their living from a highly sustainable rock lobster fishery, but a massive 91% of their marine zone is strictly protected. No extraction allowed whatsoever. It's this vast sanctuary protecting ancient deep-sea corals and giving whales and seabirds an entirely undisturbed haven.
Part 4. The Outpost of Stones. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui.
The ancient Rapa Nui civilization developed here in extraordinary isolation, famously watched over by those huge monolithic moai statues. But to survive the rugged volcanic terrain and intense periodic droughts, they had to aggressively adapt. They innovated this brilliant technique called lithic mulching.
Basically, they deliberately covered their agricultural fields with crushed rocks and gravel. It sounds counterintuitive, but it trapped precious moisture and protected the delicate soil from fierce wind erosion.
Now look at this quote from Major Rollin in 1786. He noted a soil which, quote, furnished excellent provisions and in an abundance more than sufficient. That creates a really haunting contrast with what we see today. Paleobotanical evidence shows us this island was once covered in lush tropical forests. Today, it's severely eroded and treeless, a stark reminder of what happens when ecological pressures, like aggressive forest clearing and introduced rats, take their toll. Yet, the community was remarkably resilient, adopting to survive in an ecosystem they highly altered themselves.
Part 5. The cost of extreme isolation. Survival logistics.
So how do these places, these settlements that literally feel like outposts on distant planets, actually function today? What is the sheer logistical cost to keep them alive? Geopolitical survival at this edge requires some highly specialized rules. Easter Island enforces a strict 30-day limit for tourists, and they literally have to ship their solid waste back to the mainland. Up in Longyearbyen, entry is unrestricted, but they rely on these heavily insulated above-ground utility corridors because the permafrost is thawing. And Itto-Kortormiit relies entirely on just 2 supply ships a year for everything they can't hunt or gather.
Now, I want you to imagine this being your daily routine. In some of Greenland's most remote spots, without modern piping, residents literally depend on the sea ice. They gather large ice floes during the winter and melt them down in these highly expensive government smelters. Imagine paying a fortune just to get a single glass of water. From there, citizens have to manually fetch their water in plastic containers from a central tapping house.
Ultimately, keeping life going on these extreme frontiers requires intense cross-subsidization. In Greenland, for example, the government standardizes power and water pricing everywhere. So towns with cheaper hydropower basically foot the bill for the massive costs of running diesel generators and ice smelters out in the remote settlements. They also heavily reduce export freight costs, just so the local fishing economies at the absolute edge of the world can actually survive.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, provocative thought to end our explainer on today. Why do humans push to the very edge of the uninhabitable, and what are we willing to sacrifice to stay there? Whether it's freezing Siberian valleys, ice-locked Arctic fjords, or lonely volcanic peaks in the deep ocean, the sheer effort required to sustain life is monumental, yet we do it anyway. As long as there is an edge to this earth, humanity will stubbornly and beautifully find a way to call it home. Thanks so much for joining me on this incredible journey, and I hope this sparks your curiosity to look even deeper into our world's most alien frontiers. Catch you next time.